clap your hands once at the base of Chichen Itza's Great Pyramid, the echo that comes back isn't quite an echo. It's a bird call, a quetzal's cry to be precise. The Maya built this structure over 1,000 years ago, and somehow, whether by accident or impossible design, they created a pyramid that sings. That's just the beginning. Beneath the structure you're standing before, there are 2 more pyramids, hidden like nested secrets. In the nearby cenote, divers have pulled up gold, jade, and human bones from waters so deep and dark that we still haven't reached the bottom. And twice a year, as the sun reaches a precise angle, a serpent made of shadow descends the pyramid stairs, linking earth to sky in a display of astronomical knowledge that shouldn't have been possible without computers. I've stood at Chichen Itza 4 times now, and each visit left me with more questions than answers. The heat, the silence between tour groups, the weight of all that engineered stone, it gets inside you. This isn't just a pyramid, it's a puzzle that refuses to be solved. Stand at the north base of El Castillo, the pyramid the Spanish named the Castle, about 50 feet from the main staircase. The structure rises before you in 9 terraced levels, each edge sharp against the Yucatan sky. The limestone blocks, cut with precision that still impresses modern engineers, hold the heat of the day even as evening approaches. Now clap your hands once, sharply. What comes back makes most people go silent, then clap again, disbelieving. The echo doesn't sound like a hand clap reflected. It sounds organic, alive, like the chirp of a bird, specifically the call of a resplendent quetzal. The sound seems to emanate from the pyramid itself, as if the stone is speaking. This isn't subtle, it's unmistakable, and it's been puzzling researchers since someone first thought to document it scientifically. The acoustic phenomenon was brought to serious archaeological attention in 1998, though locals and visitors had noticed it for generations. David Lubman, an acoustic engineer, presented findings at the Acoustical Society of America that year, demonstrating that the echo from a hand clap at the base of El Castillo's northern staircase produces a sound strongly resembling the call of the quetzal, a bird sacred to the Maya, associated with the god Kukulkan himself. Other researchers, including Belgian scientist Nico de Klerk, later published peer-reviewed studies in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America, confirming the phenomenon and proposing mechanisms. What started as curious observation became documented science. But documentation doesn't mean understanding. The question that emerged was more troubling than the phenomenon itself. Did the Maya engineer this deliberately? 10 centuries ago, this landscape looked different. The forest was carefully managed, not the wild growth that surrounds the ruins today. Chichen Itza was a thriving city, politically powerful, controlling trade routes across the Yucatan. The pyramid you're standing before didn't exist yet in its current form. Between roughly 800 and 900 CE, Maya architects and engineers designed and built El Castillo with mathematical precision that encoded astronomical data into its very structure. The climate was warmer, wetter, agriculture flourished. The Maya had sophisticated knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and architecture, though they worked without metal tools, without the wheel for practical construction, without draft animals. They shaped limestone with stone tools and moved massive blocks using human labor, ropes, and rollers. In this world, they created El Castillo. And somehow, whether through intentional design or remarkable accident, they made it sing. Here's what makes this unexplainable. The acoustic effect results from the interaction between the periodic spacing of the steps and the wavelength of the sound produced by a hand clap. The staircase has precisely spaced treads and risers. When you clap, you create a sound impulse, a sharp, broad-spectrum noise. As this sound wave travels up the staircase, each step reflects a portion of it back. Because the steps are evenly spaced, these reflections arrive at your ears at regular intervals, creating what acousticians call diffraction. The spacing of these reflections happens to fall within the frequency range of 1000 to 1500 Hz, exactly matching the dominant frequency of a quetzal's call. The pyramid essentially filters and shapes the white noise of your hand clap into a specific pitch. This is sophisticated acoustic engineering. Modern concert halls struggle to achieve such precise acoustic effects, even with computer modeling. The Maya accomplished it. If it was intentional, the coincidence is staggering. Multiple researchers have measured the phenomenon with acoustic equipment. The data is clear. De Klerk's 2004 study used computational models to demonstrate that the step dimensions, approximately 30 centimeters in height, create the necessary periodicity to generate the chirp-like echo. The physics is sound. The math checks out. What we can't determine with certainty is intent. There are no Maya texts that say, "We designed this pyramid to echo like Kukulkan's sacred bird." The codices that survived Spanish conquest don't detail architectural acoustics. We're left interpreting the builder's intentions from the structure itself. Some archaeologists argue the effect is coincidental, a lucky accident of standardized step dimensions, chosen for structural reasons, not acoustic ones. The steps needed to be a certain size for people to climb. That size happened to create the echo. Others point out that the Maya were obsessed with astronomical and mathematical precision, that everything at Chichen Itza seems to encode meaning, and that dismissing this as accident ignores the sophistication of Maya science. The debate continues in academic journals and conferences. Mainstream archaeology is divided. Dr. Francisco Perez, who has spent decades studying Chichen Itza's acoustics and published multiple papers on the subject, believes the effect was absolutely intentional, pointing to other acoustic anomalies at the site. The ball court, for instance, has remarkable sound transmission properties, allowing a whisper at one end to be clearly heard at the other, nearly 500 feet away. He argues the Maya understood acoustic principles and applied them deliberately. Skeptics like Dr. Anthony Avini, an archaeoastronomer who has written extensively on Maya science, caution against overinterpreting. He acknowledges the effect is real, but argues we lack evidence of Maya acoustic knowledge sophisticated enough to engineer it intentionally. Without a smoking gun text or additional evidence, we're projecting modern understanding onto ancient work. Both positions are defensible. Neither can be proven absolutely. The pyramid keeps its secrets. The Yucatec Maya people, whose ancestors built Chichen Itza, have their own understanding. Oral traditions passed through generations speak of Chichen Itza as a sacred place where the gods communicated with humans, where Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, descended to walk among the people. The Quetzal bird was Kukulkan's earthly representation. When the pyramid echoes with the bird's voice, elder Maya speakers I've talked to see this not as acoustic engineering, but as spiritual design. The pyramid was meant to be a bridge between worlds. Of course, it carries the voice of the divine. This interpretation doesn't contradict the physics, it simply frames it differently. The same phenomenon, understood through a different lens. Western science asks, how did they make this sound? Maya tradition asks, why would we not give voice to the sacred? Both questions matter. Visit Chichen Itza today, and you'll find it's one of Mexico's most visited archaeological sites, drawing millions annually. Tour groups gather at the pyramid's base throughout the day. Guides demonstrate the clap echo phenomenon, and the sound of dozens of visitors clapping to hear the Quetzal's response becomes its own strange chorus. The pyramid itself is roped off now. You can't climb it anymore, not since a visitor fell to her death in 2006. You stand at its base, looking up at stairs you'll never ascend, and you clap. The bird calls back, every single time. The limestone is warm under the sun. The sound is crisp, unmistakable. Tour guides explain it in 5 languages, but standing there, hearing that impossible echo come back to you across 1,000 years, explanations feel inadequate. Whether accident or design, you're experiencing something the Maya created, and it still works perfectly. What strikes me most about this place is how it refuses simple categories. We want to say they knew or they didn't know, but maybe knowledge looked different then. Maybe acoustic principles were understood intuitively through trial and observation without the mathematical formulas we use to describe them. Maybe the distinction between sacred design and acoustic engineering is our modern invention, and to the Maya, they were the same thing. I've clapped at that pyramid 4 times now, and each time, when the Quetzal's voice comes back, I feel like I'm participating in something I don't fully understand. That humility, that recognition that ancient people achieved things we can barely explain, might be the most important thing this pyramid teaches. The question remains suspended in the air along with the echo. Did they know what they were building? And perhaps more unsettling, what else did they know that we're still failing to recognize?
300 meters north of El Castillo, the earth suddenly opens. The cenote sagrado, the sacred cenote, is a natural sinkhole roughly 60 meters in diameter, with limestone walls dropping straight down about 27 meters to dark water below. Stand at the edge and you feel the temperature drop. The cenote breathes cool air even in the Yucatan heat. The water is murky, opaque with dissolved limestone and organic matter. You cannot see what's beneath the surface. For over 1,000 years, the Maya threw precious objects, offerings, and human beings into these waters. What they left behind and why remains one of the most haunting mysteries of Chichen Itza. The cenote's archaeological significance exploded into public consciousness between 1904 and 1911 when Edward Herbert Thompson, the U.S. consul to Yucatan and an amateur archaeologist, dredged the cenote using equipment he'd brought from the United States. Thompson had read accounts written by Diego de Landa, the Spanish bishop who, ironically, both destroyed countless Maya codices and documented Maya culture in his 1566 work, Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán. Landa wrote that in times of drought or crisis, the Maya of Chichen Itza threw offerings and human sacrifices into the sacred well. Thompson, believing Landa's account, essentially treasure hunted the cenote. What he brought up stunned even him. Gold discs, copper bells, jade carvings, incense, rubber, copal, carved wood, textiles that disintegrated upon contact with air, and human bones, dozens of skulls and skeletal remains. He shipped most of it to Harvard's Peabody Museum. The Mexican government was not pleased when they found out decades later, and long legal battles eventually returned some materials to Mexico. But the damage, or discovery, depending on your perspective, was done. The cenote had been proven to hold exactly what the Spanish chronicles described. 1,000 years ago, this cenote was central to Chichen Itza's ceremonial life. The climate records suggest the terminal classic period, when the cenote saw heaviest use, experienced severe droughts. Tree ring data from across Mesoamerica shows periods of significantly reduced rainfall between 800 and 1000 CE. For the Maya, whose agriculture depended entirely on rainfall, there are no rivers in the northern Yucatan, only these cenotes reaching down to the water table. Drought meant catastrophe. The cenotes weren't just water sources, they were portals to Xibalba, the watery underworld where gods and ancestors dwelled. The cenote sagrado wasn't used for drinking water. There's another cenote at Chichen Itza, the Xtolok, that served that purpose. The sacred cenote was for communication with the divine. When rain failed and crops withered, the Maya brought their most precious possessions to this edge and let them fall into darkness. And sometimes they brought people.
Here's what makes this so difficult to fully understand. The human remains tell a complicated story. When Thompson dredged the cenote, he found bones, but his methods were crude, and detailed osteological analysis wasn't possible then. Later expeditions, including a major effort by Mexico's Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia, INA, in the 1960s, using proper archaeological diving techniques, recovered additional remains. Modern analysis of these bones reveals something unexpected. Yes, there are remains of children and adults, but the popular image of mass human sacrifice, terrified victims thrown to their deaths, doesn't match the evidence. Some remains show peri-mortem trauma consistent with sacrifice, but others don't. Some bodies were apparently already deceased when they entered the water. Age and sex distribution isn't what we'd expect if this were purely about sacrificing young women, as some sensationalized accounts suggested. Instead, we find a range: children, adult men, adult women, elderly individuals. The jade, gold, and precious goods show careful selection, deliberate offering. But who exactly was chosen to enter the cenote and why remains unclear. Scientific investigation has added data without necessarily adding clarity. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from the cenote spans centuries, from around 700 CE to the Spanish conquest period in the 1500s. The cenote was used continuously for offerings across a vast stretch of time. Analysis of the gold discs, created using the Hepuse technique, where gold is hammered from behind to create relief images, shows they weren't all made at Chichen Itza. Some came from as far as Costa Rica or Panama, suggesting trade networks or tribute systems bringing precious goods from across Mesoamerica specifically to be offered here. The jade, too, came from distant sources, the Motagua Valley in Guatemala, hundreds of kilometers away. People brought the most valuable materials they could acquire and gave them to the water. The effort, the expense, the organization required, all to feed a well that gave nothing material back. Competing theories attempt to explain the pattern. One interpretation, held by researchers like Dr. Peter Schmidt of INA, views the cenote offerings as complex ritual communication with rain gods and underworld deities. The offerings intensified during drought periods, based on dating of materials and correlation with climate data. This was negotiation with cosmic forces, sacrifice in the true sense, making sacred, making holy. Those who entered the water, living or dead, became messengers to the gods. Another perspective, argued by some archaeologists, suggests political dimensions. Chichen Itza's rulers may have used cenote ceremonies to consolidate power, to demonstrate their unique connection to divine forces. The offerings could be tribute from conquered territories, symbols of political submission transformed into religious ritual. A third view, less common in mainstream archaeology but present in some interpretations, sees the cenote as a place of transformation, where certain individuals, perhaps shamans, priests, or chosen devotees, underwent ritual death and rebirth. Some Maya accounts speak of sacred divers who entered cenotes and returned with prophecies. Perhaps not everyone thrown in was meant to die. The living descendants of the Maya who built Chichen Itza still regard cenotes as sacred. Modern Maya communities across the Yucatan maintain traditions of cenote veneration. Some perform ceremonies at cenotes for rain, for healing, for blessing. When I spoke with a Maya elder from a nearby village, a man who requested I not use his name in writing, he explained that his grandfather had told him stories of Chichen Itza, passed down through generations. In these accounts, the cenote was called the mouth that listens. What you gave to it was heard by those below. The offerings weren't payments or bribes to gods. They were languages of devotion, ways of speaking when words weren't enough. He said something I haven't forgotten. You don't understand it as sacrifice. We understand it as sending word to our ancestors in the only way that reaches them. This tradition of cenote veneration isn't archaeological theory, it's living practice, connecting present to past in an unbroken line of belief.
Today, you can walk to the Cenote Sagrado along the ancient Sac Bay, the raised limestone road that connects it to the main plaza. The cenote is fenced for protection, but you can peer over the edge into water that looks almost black from above. The surface occasionally ripples from fish or falling leaves. It's impossible to see the bottom, even in bright sunlight. The depth varies, but excavations found objects buried in mud over 13 meters below the waterline. Signs in Spanish and English explain the history. Tour groups gather, take photos, and move on. But the atmosphere is different here than at the pyramid. Quieter. Even tourists seem to speak more softly. Something about standing at the edge of this vertical shaft, knowing what lies below, creates instinctive reverence. You're standing where priests stood, where offerings were made, where people confronted the ultimate unknown and chose to give everything to it. My own feeling is that we make a mistake when we try to interpret the sacred cenote through a single lens. It wasn't just a sacrificial site, just a political tool, just a water cult, or just a spiritual portal. It was all of these things, layered across centuries, meaning different things to different people in different eras. The Maya civilization wasn't monolithic. It was a culture that evolved over millennia, across vast geography, through periods of prosperity and collapse. What the cenote meant in 700 CE probably differed from what it meant in 1200 CE. The objects at the bottom represent hundreds of individual decisions, hundreds of moments of devotion, fear, hope, or political calculation. We've pulled up the artifacts and analyzed the bones, but we're still looking at shadows of motivations we can barely imagine. The cenote holds more than artifacts. It holds the accumulated weight of centuries of belief, preserved in water too dark to see through. We've brought up some of what was given, but diving expeditions have never fully excavated the cenote. It's too deep, too silted, too dangerous. Somewhere in that mud, more remains, more stories, more questions we haven't even thought to ask yet. From the outside, El Castillo appears to be a single structure, one pyramid rising in precise geometry toward the sky. That appearance is a lie. Hidden completely within the pyramid you see, there are two earlier pyramids, one nested inside the other like Russian dolls made of stone. The innermost structure holds a chamber containing one of the most extraordinary objects ever found in Mesoamerica. A throne, carved from stone, covered in red paint, inlaid with jade, shaped like a jaguar. When archaeologists first saw it in the darkness of that sealed room, they were looking at something that had been deliberately buried, preserved, hidden inside newer construction for over 1,000 years. Why the Maya built over their own monumental architecture instead of simply demolishing it remains one of Chichen Itza's deepest puzzles. The discovery began in 1932 when Mexican archaeologists noticed anomalies while conducting restoration work on El Castillo. Under the direction of José Erosa Peniche, workers found evidence suggesting the visible pyramid was built over an earlier structure. This is common in Maya archaeology. Many sites show construction phases where new buildings rise atop old ones, but Chichen Itza's nested pyramids proved extraordinary in their preservation. By the early 1930s, excavators had found an interior staircase and a tunnel providing access to the earlier constructions. In 1935, they broke through into an inner chamber and found the red jaguar throne, complete with jade inlay eyes and jade spots. Later excavations revealed a Chakmul statue in an anterior chamber, a reclining figure holding a plate on its stomach, used for receiving offerings. In 2016, researchers using a technique called electrical resistivity tomography and ground-penetrating radar confirmed the existence of yet another structure inside even the first pyramid, suggesting at least 3 distinct construction phases, each one completely encasing the previous one. Step backward in time with me. Around 600 to 700 CE, the first pyramid at this location was built, the innermost structure, small by later standards but significant. This was early in Chichen Itza's rise to power. The climate was favorable, trade networks were expanding, and the city was establishing itself as a major center. Workers cut limestone blocks, shaped them without metal tools, and raised a pyramid temple. Inside, they built chambers and placed objects of power. The jaguar throne, painted red with the toxic mercury-based pigment cinnabar, embedded with jade pieces shaped and polished to gleaming smoothness. The throne faced the entrance, ready for a ruler or priest to sit in representation of divine authority. This building stood open to the air, active, used for ceremonies and rituals we can only imagine. Then, for reasons still debated, the decision was made to build a larger pyramid directly over it, not to destroy it, to preserve it. Workers filled the rooms with rubble to support the weight, sealed the chambers, and began construction of a second pyramid that completely enclosed the first.
That second pyramid stood for perhaps a century or two before the pattern repeated. Again, instead of demolition, the Maya chose encaselation. The third pyramid, the one visible today, rose around the second, which itself held the first. Each time, the builders increased the scale. The final version of El Castillo measures approximately 55 meters along each side at the base and rises about 24 meters to the platform where the temple sits, another 6 meters of height. The geometry is precise, the alignment astronomical, but beneath all that visible achievement, two earlier versions remain, sealed in permanent darkness, accessible only through the tunnels archaeologists have carved. Here's the mystery that keeps me turning this over in my mind. Why? Why preserve the earlier structures instead of demolishing them for building material? Maya cities elsewhere showed demolition and reuse of stone. It's practical, efficient. Building over instead of tearing down requires far more labor and material. You're essentially building 3 pyramids worth of stone instead of 1. The effort is exponential, yet they chose this method deliberately, twice. Some researchers, including Dr. Peter Schmidt, argue this represents Maya concepts of cyclical time and renewal. The old structure isn't destroyed because it holds power that must be contained, not eliminated. The new building gains strength from the old one at its heart. Its architectural layering is cosmic principle, each cycle building upon, not replacing, what came before. Others suggest political motivations. A new ruler or dynasty might want to demonstrate superiority by building larger, but destroying the old entirely might anger those loyal to previous rulers or gods. Encasing preserves while superseding. Analysis of construction techniques shows sophisticated engineering. The Maya builders had to calculate load distribution carefully to prevent the weight of the outer pyramid from crushing the inner chambers. They filled some spaces with rubble, but left others, like the Jaguar throne chamber, essentially intact, creating internal voids that could have been structural weaknesses. Yet the pyramid has stood for over 1,000 years, surviving hurricanes, earthquakes, and the weight of millions of tourists' footsteps. The knowledge required to engineer such a structure without modern stress calculation or computer modeling speaks to an understanding of architecture that rivals our own, just expressed through different methods. They must have tested, observed, adjusted, and learned from failures we have no record of. The successful structures that survive represent the culmination of that knowledge, but they don't show us the learning process that created it. The red Jaguar throne itself poses questions beyond the mystery of its burial. The pigment covering it is cinnabar, mercury sulfide, imported from distant deposits, toxic to handle, and chosen specifically for its blood-red color. Jade, the most precious material in Mesoamerica, more valuable than gold to the Maya, forms the eyes and spots in realistic detail. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Someone carved the throne from a single large block of limestone, shaped it into a crouching jaguar with lifelike proportions, smoothed the surface, painted it entirely in cinnabar, and inlaid jade pieces using techniques that required drilling into stone with stone tools. The labor involved represents thousands of hours. This was an object of supreme importance, and they sealed it in darkness, never to be seen again, until archaeologists tunneled in 1,200 years later. What compels you to create such an object and then bury it forever? Modern visitors to Chichen Itza can no longer access the inner pyramid or the Jaguar throne chamber. The tunnel that archaeologists used was open to tourists for decades, but concerns about humidity damage to the ancient paintings and the structural integrity of the pyramid led to its closure in 2006. The inner chambers are now sealed again, accessible only to researchers with specific permits. The jaguar throne sits in darkness, as it did for centuries, as it was perhaps meant to do forever. You stand outside the visible pyramid, knowing the secret is there, unreachable. It creates a strange feeling. The most precious artifact is the one you can't see, buried at the heart of the structure you're looking at. What strikes me most about this place is the paradox of preservation through burial. We think of monuments as things meant to be seen, statements of power displayed. But the Maya buried their most powerful objects, sealed their most sacred spaces, and built mountains of stone over them. This suggests a worldview where power doesn't require visibility, where the sacred is potent even, especially when hidden. The jaguar throne radiates power in darkness, unseen, feeding strength to the structure around it. Or at least that's how I imagine the builders thought about it. I could be completely wrong. That's the humility these places demand. Somewhere in that stone mountain, in a chamber breathing with centuries of sealed air, a red jaguar still waits, eyes gleaming jade in the darkness. It has been waiting since before Charlemagne, since before the fall of Rome, waiting in a silence so complete that when archaeologists first broke through, they said the air that rushed out smelled like time itself.
Twice each year, as the sun reaches the precise angle of the spring and autumn equinoxes, something impossible appears on the northern staircase of El Castillo. The late afternoon sun creates a pattern of light and shadow on the pyramid's northwest corner that looks exactly like a serpent, specifically a feathered serpent, descending the stairs from heaven to earth. 7 triangles of light form along the edge of the stairway, connecting perfectly to the massive stone serpent head at the base. For approximately 30 minutes, as the sun moves and the angle changes, the serpent appears to undulate, to move, to descend. Then it fades. This happens with such precision that thousands gather twice a year to witness it. The question isn't whether it happens, anyone can see it. The question is how the Maya, working over 1,000 years ago without computers, telescopes, or modern surveying equipment, encoded astronomical knowledge so precise into monumental architecture. The serpent shadow phenomenon was recognized by modern researchers in the mid-20th century, though locals and visitors had noticed it informally for longer. By the 1970s and 1980s, archaeoastronomers, researchers who study how ancient cultures understood and encoded astronomical knowledge, were documenting the equinox event scientifically. Researchers like Anthony Aveni and Sharon Gibbs published studies showing that the effect required specific architectural features: the 9 terraced levels, the precise angle of the staircases, the alignment of the pyramid's sides to the cardinal directions, and the serpent heads positioned exactly at the base. Change any one element, and the effect fails. The Maya designed El Castillo as a massive calendar in stone, where the equinox sun announced itself through divine imagery. Travel back to the construction era, around 800 to 900 CE. The Maya had been observing celestial movements for over 1,000 years by this point. Their calendar systems were multiple and overlapping: the 260-day Tzolk'in ritual calendar, the 365-day Hab agricultural calendar, and the long count that measured vast cycles of time. They tracked Venus with accuracy that rivals modern astronomical tables. They predicted eclipses, but they did all of this with naked-eye observation, patient record-keeping across generations, and mathematical sophistication that let them find patterns in celestial movements. When they designed El Castillo, they brought this accumulated knowledge to bear. The pyramid isn't just a temple, it's an instrument, a tool for marking time and connecting celestial cycles to earthly experience. The 4 staircases each have 91 steps. Multiply by 4 and you get 364. Add the platform at the top as one final step and you reach 365, the days of the solar year. This isn't coincidence.
Here's what makes the serpent shadow so remarkable.
Creating the effect requires aligning multiple factors perfectly. First, the pyramid must be oriented to the cardinal directions with extreme precision. Measurements show El Castillo's sides aligned to within fractions of a degree. Second, the height, angle, and number of terrace levels must create the right geometry for sunlight at the equinox and only at the equinox to cast triangular shadows at the proper intervals. Third, the balustrade alongside the staircase must angle outward at exactly the right degree. Too steep or too shallow, and the shadow pattern fails. Fourth, the serpent heads at the base must be positioned exactly where the shadow will complete the body. The builders had to visualize the desired effect, calculate backward to determine the architectural requirements, and execute construction with millimeter precision across a structure roughly 55 meters on each side. We struggled to do this with computer-aided design. They did it with stone tools and astronomical observation. The research continues with fascinating complications. In 2016, Denise Argos Espinosa and colleagues used ground-penetrating radar in electrical resistivity tomography to create three-dimensional maps of El Castillo's interior. They confirmed the nested pyramids, as discussed earlier, but also revealed that the cenote, yes, another cenote, lies directly beneath El Castillo. The pyramid was built over a natural sinkhole. This discovery adds layers to the mystery. Did the Maya choose this location specifically because a cenote, a portal to the underworld, existed beneath it? Does the serpent shadow descending the pyramid metaphorically continue downward into the watery underworld below? The implications suggest even more sophisticated site planning than previously understood. They didn't just build a pyramid, they built it over a sacred geological feature, integrating Earth, sky, and underworld into a single cosmic axis. Scholars debate how intentional the serpent shadow effect truly was. Dr. Ivan Spreitz, an archaeoastronomer who has studied dozens of Maya sites, argues that while the Maya were certainly capable of the required precision, we should be cautious about over-interpreting every alignment and shadow as intentional design. Some effects may be coincidental or secondary to other architectural goals. He points out that the equinox isn't particularly significant in Maya calendar systems compared to solstices or zenith passages. Why encode the equinox so dramatically if it wasn't astronomically central to their calendar? Others, like Dr. Jesus Galindo Trejo, counter that the equinox marks balance, equal day and night, a cosmologically significant moment, even if not agriculturally crucial. The serpent descending could represent Kukulkan, bringing balance to the world. Both interpretations have merit. The pyramid doesn't come with an instruction manual.
The living Maya communities maintain their own understanding of El Castillo and the serpent's descent. During my visits to Chichen Itza around the equinox, I've seen Maya families, dressed in traditional white clothing, performing ceremonies as the serpent appears. They bring offerings, burn copal incense, and pray in Yucatec Maya. When I asked one participant, a woman from Piste, the village adjacent to Chichen Itza, what the serpent meant to her community, she explained that it represents Kukulkan, returning to bless the earth and the people. It's a renewal, a promise that the cycles continue, that the ancestors' knowledge remains alive in stone. Her grandmother witnessed the serpent before tourists came in buses. Her great-grandmother did too. The shadow connects generations. To her, whether the architects intended it in the scientific sense misses the point. They built it and it works, and that's what matters. The stone teaches what it teaches. Visit Chichen Itza during the spring equinox in late March and you'll encounter massive crowds, sometimes 20,000 people. The Mexican government hosts official events with traditional dancers and ceremonies. Hotels for miles around book out months in advance. The park extends hours to accommodate the throngs. As the afternoon progresses, people pack the area in front of the pyramid's north face, cameras ready. The sun descends. The shadows begin to form. A murmur runs through the crowd. The first triangle appears, then the second. The serpent takes shape, as it has for over 1,000 years. For 30 minutes, time collapses. The Maya who built this are present in their work, speaking a language of light and geometry that transcends words. Then the sun moves past the critical angle. The serpent fades. The crowd applauds, as if the pyramid performed for them. People disperse, heading back to buses and hotels, scrolling through the photos on their phones. The pyramid stands silent. In 6 months, at the autumn equinox, it will happen again. My own feeling is that the serpent shadow represents a kind of knowledge we've forgotten how to value. We can describe the geometry, measure the angles, calculate the solar position, but we've lost the integration of architecture, astronomy, theology, and art that created it. To the Maya, these weren't separate disciplines. Building a pyramid wasn't engineering separate from worship. Tracking Venus wasn't astronomy separate from agriculture. Everything connected. The serpent shadow embodies that holistic knowledge. It's science in art, in prayer made solid. We stand before it as fractured people, trying to understand through fragmented lenses. Maybe that's why it still feels like magic, even when we can explain the optics. The stone serpent head at the base of the stairs, worn smooth by a millennium of weather, opens its mouth in permanent silence. Twice a year, shadow gives it a body. The rest of the time, it waits, patient, eternal, carved by hands we never knew, speaking in a language of sunlight that still somehow reaches us.